What will happen to Donald Trump if youth unemployment surges past 10%? What happens when the next generation loses faith in the promise of the American dream? Right now, economists warn that youth unemployment is inching dangerously close to double digits, with the possibility of surpassing 10%. For young Americans, this isn't just about delayed paychecks. It's about delayed futures. The chance to pay for college, start families, and buy homes. And for Donald Trump, who has built his political brand around being the self-proclaimed architect of economic success, this looming crisis could spell political disaster. If rising unemployment among young voters hardens into anger at the ballot box, the consequences may be far greater than a bad headline or two. Stay tuned as we break it down right now. The health of the American labor market is often the most important barometer of presidential performance. While foreign policy crises or partisan struggles capture headlines, it is the monthly jobs report that quietly shapes public opinion and electoral outcomes. Presidents are judged by whether people feel secure in their jobs, whether wages keep up with costs, and whether young people see a future in the economy. Against this backdrop, the rise of youth unemployment to levels above 10% carries major consequences. The specific question posed is what will happen to Donald Trump if youth unemployment surges past 10%. This is not just a technical scenario, but a pressing concern given recent data. The August jobs report showed only 22,000 jobs added nationwide, far below expectations. Revisions to previous months revealed job losses, and the cohort most affected was workers aged 16 to 24, with unemployment rising to 10.5%. This number, though seemingly abstract, represents hundreds of thousands of young Americans unable to find work at the beginning of their careers. The implications extend far beyond economics. Youth unemployment intersects with politics, social trust, and the legitimacy of leadership. For a president who has framed himself as a singular economic steward, such figures are deeply problematic. The following analysis will proceed systematically to examine how Trump's position may be altered if youth unemployment stays high. The United States economy in mid-2024 and 2025 is navigating competing forces. On one hand, technological disruption, particularly artificial intelligence, is displacing entry-level positions in customer service, retail, and even clerical work. On the other, tariff policies and trade conflicts have raised costs for manufacturers and reduced hiring. The job market, which showed resilience in 2021 and 2022, has slowed sharply. The August report added only 22,000 jobs, compared with expectations of 75,000. June saw a loss of 13,000 jobs, and July was revised downward. The four-month trend is the weakest since the Great Recession outside of the pandemic shock. The headline unemployment rate at 4.3% obscures deeper problems. Youth unemployment at 10.5%, African-American unemployment at 7.5%, and a loss of more than 78,000 manufacturing jobs highlight structural weaknesses. The Trump administration's response has been to blame the Federal Reserve, with repeated criticism of Jerome Powell for not lowering interest rates quickly enough. Advisors have also questioned the accuracy of Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Yet these explanations do little to address the lived reality of young workers. The unemployment rate for young people is not just a marginal statistic. It carries long-term consequences that ripple throughout the economy. First, it sets the trajectory of careers. Research shows that entering the labor market during a downturn leads to permanent earnings losses. Workers who cannot secure stable employment early in their careers often lag behind for decades. Second, youth unemployment constrains consumer demand. Young workers are significant spenders on technology, entertainment, and travel. Their absence from the workforce reduces growth in these industries and depresses overall economic momentum. Third, elevated youth unemployment risks social discontent. History shows that when young people lack opportunities, frustration can fuel distrust in government, higher rates of disengagement, or even unrest. Finally, it carries clear political implications. Younger voters evaluate presidents differently than older voters. If they feel excluded from the economy, they are more likely to oppose incumbents and mobilize for change. For Donald Trump, these dynamics are critical. His base has traditionally skewed older, but he cannot afford to alienate younger demographics entirely. Rising youth unemployment threatens to frame his leadership as economically insecure. History provides examples of presidents who saw their fortunes shaped by employment trends. Herbert Hoover became associated with mass unemployment during the Great Depression, a legacy that overshadowed global causes. Jimmy Carter's presidency was undone by stagflation in the late 1970s. George H.W. Bush lost re-election in 1992 despite foreign policy success, largely because of a recession and weak job growth. By contrast, Bill Clinton's 1990s economic boom cemented his popularity. Barack Obama struggled during the 2010 midterms with high unemployment, but regained ground as the economy improved. The pattern is clear. Presidents cannot easily escape political consequences when unemployment rises. Voters may accept that external shocks play a role, but they ultimately hold leaders accountable. If youth unemployment stays above 10%, Trump risks being linked in public memory with a generation's lost opportunities. Several policy areas intersect with youth unemployment. Trade policy is central. Tariffs on imports raise costs for manufacturers and consumers. While designed to protect domestic industry, in practice, they often discourage hiring. Evidence shows that Trump's broad tariffs have coincided with a net loss of manufacturing jobs this year. Monetary policy also plays a role. Trump has demanded aggressive interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. Yet central banks must balance inflation risks with employment. Even if rates were lowered, structural issues like automation and global competition would not be solved. Labor rights represent another dimension. Trump's administration has opposed certain pro-union measures, weakening collective bargaining power that historically secured entry-level opportunities. This stance may further reduce options for young workers. Technology and innovation policy are perhaps the most decisive. Artificial intelligence is reshaping industries rapidly. Without strategic investment in retraining, apprenticeship, and education, younger workers will continue to face barriers. The impact of youth unemployment is uneven. It is higher among minority communities, compounding existing inequalities. African American unemployment has risen to 7.5%, while Hispanic and rural youth also face difficulties. These disparities undermine social cohesion and feed narratives of exclusion. The gender dimension is also notable. Young women entering the workforce in retail and service industries are disproportionately affected by automation and wage stagnation. Without targeted support, gender gaps in income and employment could widen. Educational attainment is another factor. College graduates may experience underemployment rather than outright unemployment, but those with only high school diplomas are most at risk of prolonged joblessness. This dynamic creates frustration and perceptions of inequality across class lines. What will happen to Donald Trump if youth unemployment surges past 10%? Several outcomes are possible. First, the narrative of economic competence could collapse. Trump has repeatedly claimed to be a builder of jobs and a protector of workers. If data consistently shows rising unemployment among young people, this narrative weakens. Second, opposition parties would find a potent issue. Democrats and independents could argue that Trump's policies, particularly tariffs, have directly harmed job creation. The image of a president disconnected from the struggles of younger workers could gain traction. Third, voter turnout could be affected. Young voters traditionally turn out at lower rates, but high unemployment might mobilize them, especially if opposition candidates frame themselves as champions of opportunity. Even modest increases in youth turnout can sway elections in key states. Fourth, international perception matters. Rising unemployment among young Americans could weaken the image of the United States as a land of opportunity, affecting investment and diplomacy. Several scenarios can be envisioned if youth unemployment persists above 10%. One is managed damage control. Trump and his advisors may continue to blame external actors such as the Federal Reserve or Bureau of Labor Statistics. If they can frame the unemployment as temporary and external, political damage may be softened, though not eliminated. Another scenario is cumulative damage. Month after month of weak job growth could solidify the perception that Trump presides over economic decline. Once such a perception hardens, it is difficult to reverse, voters, especially in an election year. A third scenario is political realignment. If young voters turn decisively against Trump, states with high student and youth populations could shift. This would alter the electoral map in ways difficult to compensate for elsewhere. Finally, there is the possibility of policy correction. If Trump adjusts policies, invests in youth employment programs, or moderates tariffs, he could mitigate some damage. The speed and credibility of such measures would be crucial. The consequences of sustained youth unemployment extend beyond Trump's immediate political fortunes. A generation of young people entering the workforce under difficult conditions may carry skepticism about institutions for decades. Political polarization could intensify as economic frustration intersects with cultural divides. From an economic perspective, the nation risks underutilizing talent at a time when global competition is accelerating. The inability to integrate young workers into stable employment undermines productivity and innovation. For Trump personally, the long-term implication is legacy. Presidents are remembered not just for short-term political battles, but for whether citizens felt economically secure. High youth unemployment could become a defining element of his record. The rise of youth unemployment above 10% is more than a statistical event. It is a warning sign for the American economy and a political test for Donald Trump. The numbers reflect structural changes in technology and trade, but they also expose weaknesses in policy response. For young workers, the consequences are immediate and profound. For Trump, the political risks are substantial. If history is any guide, presidents who preside over rising unemployment face lasting political costs. If youth unemployment remains elevated, Trump could struggle to defend his narrative of economic stewardship, risk losing support among key demographics, and confront an electoral environment shaped by economic anxiety. The future is not predetermined. Policy adjustments, global developments, and shifts in public perception can alter the trajectory. Yet the central truth remains: when young Americans cannot find work, the nation's economy and politics both enter dangerous territory. Donald Trump's ability to navigate this challenge will likely determine not only his immediate standing, but also how history remembers him.